let's get right to it. We've got this great panel today from the Dakotas, and let's meet them and dive right into our conversation that's going to be focused on reduced tillage systems. So first up, Dave Franzen, would you mind introducing yourself this afternoon?
Yeah, Dave Franzen. I'm the extension soil specialist with a specialty, I suppose, in soil fertility, and Abbey and I work on a number of different soil health projects together.
Thanks, Dave. And how about Luke? Please share a little bit and introduce yourself.
I'm Luke Ressler, and I farm with my wife, Ellie, and her parents, Randy and Julie Lem, south of Hillsboro, North Dakota. And if you don't know where Hillsboro is, we're smack dab in between Grand Forks and Fargo. And we raise about 8 different crops, and we have a small cow-calf operation and a small feedlot, and we're just getting into transitioning to no-till.
Thanks for joining us, Luke. And also with us this afternoon, we have Anthony.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Anthony Bly. I'm a soils field specialist with SDSU Extension. I work the whole state, but my office is out of Sioux Falls, and I also do some farming with our family's heritage, our legacy farm.
Awesome. Thanks, Anthony. And last but certainly not least, we have George. George, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm George Sperry. I grew up on a family farm, do that. I'm an agronomist, and then I do some crop consulting in central South Dakota with a few growers out in the area, mostly precision ag, writing prescriptions and soil fertility and things like that. So we raise mostly corn, beans, wheat, and sunflowers out here.
It's great to have research extension and also farmer experience from both North and South Dakota. But let's start with Anthony. And, I think we've asked this before, but, we hear a lot about why we can't do reduced tillage up here in the Northern Plains. And could you share some of your thoughts on why we can?
Well, to me, it's obvious that it's totally possible because we have examples all around us. I would venture to say that I could come up with an example in almost every county in South Dakota, and on a variety of different soil types, from heavy clays to sands, silt loams, all those different soil types. There are producers making it work, and so the notion that we can't do it should be put to rest with that fact in itself, because it is happening. Over 45% of South Dakota is under some sort of no-till or conservation tillage system. And so that comes through an inventory that NRCS conducted and has conducted for many years. And so, so the notion that we can't do it is I think, not valid anymore.
Great. So Dave, I guess I have a question for you. Fertilizer placement seems to always come up, and you talk about this in one of the Field Check podcast episodes. How do most farmers using no-till handle their fertilizer applications?
Well, there's a lot that's put on top in NPK, everything. One of the things that almost everyone does is for the crops that respond to starters, they put a starter fertilizer down. You wouldn't want to do that with soybeans, and there's a few other crops that either don't need it or can't stand it. But for small grains, corn, canola, all the crops that respond to starters, they put the phosphate below the ground. They watch their rates to make sure they're not too high. There's some concern. There's a lot of concern. I have a lot of concern that years of near surface application of ammonium-based nitrogens in soils that didn't have a lot of free lime on them to begin with. We call them low buffering soils. They're soils that are not very resistant to changes in pH. We're seeing some pretty dramatic acidic soils, particularly in the western part of the state. But even near Valley City and some of the sandier soils, those soils have been in no-till for 40 some years and didn't really have a lot of buffered lime near the surface. We're finding pHs in the 4s and in the low 5s, and that's a concern. So we have liming in our future. That, to me, that's the only downside of putting fertilizer at or near the top. As far as the stratification of phosphate potash, it's really not an agronomic problem at all, and so I don't worry about it. There's no benefit to putting those deep into the soil, apart from the crops that need the starter near or with the seed.
So one of the questions that came in, Dave, is are double shoot systems with mid-row banders or side banders for fertilizer, are those common?
I think as the farther you go west, the more common those are. Some of my first introductions to NoTill in the state back in the mid 90s were farmers from the southwest part of the state and the northwest part of the state that did that a lot. You know, they had labor problems, and so this is a way that they could use an air seeder at that time and do everything at the same time. So that it's been around for a long time, and I think it's common in some areas, and there's no reason why the person couldn't do it.
So you talked a little bit about lime is in our future, and one of the questions we had come in is, what is the best way to apply lime in a no-till situation?
So I would do it after a small grain or a short season crop where you had stable soil after harvest, where you had maybe 30 days or so, because this is not a trivial thing. You don't go down to your local fertilizer plant and load up 8 tons of fertilizer and go out and spread it. I mean, you're talking probably at the low side of a ton an acre of something like beet lime, which is our most common lime source across the state from Sidney, Montana, or up and down the valley. The material is free. The trucking is going to cost something, but it's a logistic thing. You have to line up the trucks to move it out to the field. It's dumped in the field, and then somebody that knows what they're doing and has the proper equipment, pretty steep-sided applicator, because the stuff will bridge up. I'm sure. I know it will, and because it does have a water content in it, and then it spreads. So that takes time, and so you wouldn't want to do it in the springtime when the soils are kind of mushy and gooey anyway. So you'd want to do it in the fall, and you'd probably want to do it on a short season crop so you weren't cramped for time with the snow or the fall rains coming in.
We want to go to some of the on-farm work, and so let's go to Luke. And my question for you, Luke, is you've gone to a minimum till or no-till system in a high clay soil in the Red River Valley, and you treat it as that. You treat it as a system. What are you doing to make that minimum or no-till work for you in those high clay soils?
Well, I guess I'll break it down into like 3 different categories. And we started using a lot more cover crops for one, and then we've changed a lot of our equipment. And then also we're changing our seed, and we're adding some other crops too. So we're diversifying. So with the cover crops, we have Elm River flows right through a lot of our land. And so we have spring floods every year, and we're dealing with water erosion and wind erosion. And so we're using a lot of rye after our small grains and after our corn too. And then the next year we're seeding beans into that rye. And kind of that's what we're really focusing on, is trying to take up as much moisture in the springtime that we can. Just because we have a lot of it, and we only have one field that's tile drained, and so got to have a way to get rid of all that extra water. And then far as equipment changes, we've had quite a few. My father-in-law Randy sold the chisel plow and the field cultivator this year, just so we don't have the urge to go out and do any tillage, I guess. We still have a Salford for some minimal tillage, and then we do have a old 30-foot field cultivator that we'll use for leveling off ruts, or we did a bunch of ditching this year, and there's a bunch of dirt mounds out there that we got to go level off yet this spring. So we'll use that. And then we also purchased a different corn head we want to leave as much residue out in the field as possible, and that kind of corresponds with the wind and water erosion. Our corn header that we used to have a chopping corn head, and now we got one that leaves the corn stalk standing. And then we also bought a stripper header as well for our wheat and barley and oats and rye. And we really liked the stripper header this year, especially because we had some oats that were lodged, and it worked really well on the oats, and it really sped up our harvest this fall. And then we're also looking at So fertilizer is kind of tough too with no-till, trying to get enough down, especially with corn. And so we're looking at adding a fertilizer system to our corn planter so we can add more nitrogen in the spring at planting. And then we side dress later on at about the V4, V5 stage of our corn. And then the last thing is seed. We've changed, we're having some issues with our corn and beans not emerging quickly enough in the spring. And so I'm looking for a bean that's got quick emergence and that's defensive. And then we switched everything to enlist beans this year just to kind of clean up, because we used to raise some conventional beans and we're having some escapes with some weed issues and timing. So we're hoping that the enlist gives us a little bit more leeway. And then we're also diversifying our rotation we added rye for seed production this year, just for one, to sell rye, and then two, for our own use, and then sunflowers and flax. And it was kind of fun. We put flax in this year for the first time. Randy said we haven't had flax here in 50 years. So it was a fun crop to grow, and we're going to do it again. And it just kind of helps spread things out for us. And but like I said, we're still early into it. We're lots to learn yet.
Well, it sounds like you're well on your way, Luke. You got a lot of things going on, which is good, to change up some of the equipment, the rotation, using cover crops. So that's awesome.
So next, I'm going to ask George. George, what have you seen about no-till and soil health that's important to keep these systems going?
Yeah, to go off what Dave and Luke said, I guess out here in central South Dakota, there's quite a few guys that are running like mid-row banders on their grain drills right now. A lot of guys run 1895s, and so we'll mid-row band most of all our urea, and then we'll put our, when we're planting wheat, we'll put, our starter fertilizer, our MAP, AMS, potash, zinc sulfate, all that stuff down with the seed. Just try to watch our salt so we're not getting too hot in there. But it seems like it's worked out pretty good, for wheat, and able to maintain our proteins, whether it was winter wheat or spring wheat. And, we'll work in if we need to top dress more, depending on what the protein market looks like or the yield potential of the crops. And like Luke said, a lot of no-till is all about how you're going to manage things. So with him getting that stripper header, there's been quite a few guys that have they've had them here, or a lot of guys are getting them now. And, when you got these bigger combines and you're trying to, 40-foot heads or whatever, you can't throw that out the combine very good, especially with the wind. I mean, it's always windy in South Dakota and it's never out of the right direction. So having those stripper headers and leaving all that stubble attached has been really important for a lot of us around here too. And it makes it a lot easier to plant into, because, when you're not spreading that residue, it's hard to definitely cut through it when it's laying on the ground. If you leave that residue standing, you'll catch more moisture, which is what we want to do, in snow, but it also dries out quicker because not all laying on the ground, just keeping it moist. It gets more airflow throughout the season. So, but it just basically just comes down to management. I mean, when we don't have cover on our soils, I mean, we just have a bigger issue with like crusting and things like that. If there's residue there, corn and soybeans, everything will come up through it. And then there's a lot less compaction. A lot of guys on wet years, they would do some tillage on their headlands or whatever and try and fix some ruts. But those headlands then would be even impacted even more the next year, because, tires, I mean, however far you till is how far the compaction is going to be. So I don't know if it ever really cures anything. I mean, I understand you got to do something for some ruts, but other than that, we try to stay out of there with tillage tools as much as possible. But depends on how you did everything else the years before. And when it's been wet, it's been awfully difficult, and I understand that.
So George, as a follow-up question in our chat, what is the roll width for mid-row band drills that you use?
Around here, the spacing is 20-inch spacing on the mid-row bands. It's 1895 drill, and then the seed is, it comes in behind it, and that's on 10-inch spacing. So it's no more than 5 inches away, and it's every other row. And we usually place the fertilizer, at the same depth or so as the seed, but you're always 5 inches away, unless you're turning and leaving it in the ground. Then you have other issues there. But most of the time, that's not a problem. So, and it's nice having it covered up. You don't have to worry about urease inhibitors or whatever, anything like that. We're not going to lose it to volatility, and so it's worked out very well. It just got to watch humidity when you're planting. That's probably the toughest thing.
Anthony, we're hearing a lot about residue management and ways to go about that. What can you expect, or what can somebody transitioning into a reduced till system expect with residue? Or what are some of the tricks that they should handle too, in addition to leaving the stock standing?
Yeah, the spread, I think, has been mentioned, is so important, and keep that residue up in the air. A lot of experienced no-tillers I know, they kind of sheepishly admit that they're looking for the most worn out corn head they can find, so that those stalks are as high as they can get them. And but it all starts in the fall. Take that time to set those spreaders. I know some of these new combines can actually spread it too wide. I've actually seen that. I thought it was spreading too narrow until I talked to the producer, and he said, no, we're having a problem because we're spreading it too wide. And so, take the time to make those adjustments and start out right. That will give you a really nice, even looking field the next year, and you won't think that you missed anything, because if you have those bare strips out there, they might look better, and they probably will. But that no-till has a way of catching up, and it always has in the experiments that I've been part of. It's caught up, and it's done just as well or better than the till plots that we've had. So an easy way to start out with no-tilling is in alfalfa. If you're new to this and maybe you don't have alfalfa on your farm, but that's a pretty easy way to start out no-tilling.
Great. Now, what leads people to reduce tillage? This is a great question. Maybe we should go to Luke for this. Luke, what led you to reduce tillage on your farm?
Well, I guess Randy had started about 6, 7, 8 years ago. He got tired of watching his fields blow away during the summer and those big spring wind storms, and that led him to going out and getting a Selford and trying to stay away from the field cultivator and the chisel plow as much as he can. And then, so he kind of had a good start on things. And then once Ellie and I started farming with him 2 years ago, that's when we sat down and started talking about transitioning into no-till and using more cover crops and things like that. So it's really, and your mindset is huge too. You got to have the right mindset to do it. You don't listen to your neighbors or anybody telling you that you can't do it. Focus on yourself and your operation. And I know it will work. We just got to get there and figure it out. So yeah, that's where we are at anyways.
So Luke, you mentioned already maybe some of the hurdles of listening to others saying and telling you that won't work, but what are some other hurdles that you've encountered as you've transitioned to reduced and no-till? Like
I said before, our emergence and having to deal with cold soils in the spring so far, that's kind of why we switched that stripper tiller too, like George said. Stripper header, I should say, was what we noticed is, there's more black soil underneath that residue. And so I got the rye established in there, and hopefully our beans can take off in the spring a little bit better. And we've toyed around with the idea of trying out strip tillage or bio strip till I don't know, some way to get our corn and beans out of the ground faster. Other things, like I said, water is always a problem. We're always so wet, and it seemed like we kind of jumped into this kind of feet first, and we're kind of forced to because we had so much rain, heavy rains here these past couple of years, and we were so wet that well, this last spring we're going to work some fertilizer in with the Salford before wheat, and got out there and I made one pass around the field, and I called Randy. I said, well, come out and look at this. You know, I'm just not happy with the way it looked. It was turning everything into little rocks for a seed bed. And he got out there and he's like, nope, let's just get the drill. Let's just seed it. And so that's what we ended up doing back with the fertilizer. So what we switched to is we're adding agrotane to it and just floating it on top. And so far that's been working okay. You know, you gotta kind of have a rain, hope for a rain once you get everything seeded. And here in the valley, we don't pray for rain at all because it's usually coming. So far that's been working out okay. But that's basically been what our major issues have been, is cold soils, emergence, and then you know, trying to not mud things in as much as possible.
And Luke, I know your in-laws very, very well, grew up with Ellie and that, and so I know livestock is in the backbone and the bread and butter of the farm. So do you plan on incorporating your cattle into the cropland and into your no-till system?
We're going to have a 20-acre piece this year of a full season cover crop that we will run the cows on. So with our water erosion and the river flooding, we've got some areas that are the river's cutting a channel across the field. And so we're going to transition some farmland back into grassland for pasture. And while that's growing and getting established this year, we're going to run the cows out on some cover crops. And then I'd really like to expand our herd. And I don't know, with the amount of pasture land that we have and our location, I don't know if a cow-calf operation, like expanding that, is our best choice or not. But I'm curious about trying out running some more stockers. And the reason why is I want to, they have a smaller frame. You can run more animals out on an acre, and plan to grow them kind of like grass calves or something during the summer and fall. And then possibly, you know, depending on the market, we could always put them in the feedlot and feed them out or sell them. You know, they're pretty liquid that way. So if we ever run into a drought or some sort of financial situation that we need to dump them early, we can. So that's kind of what I've been playing around with. It's early yet. I'd like to have a whole quarter at some point in cover crops or something and run cows out on. I think that'd be pretty fun and pretty sweet. But I got to run the numbers yet and figure all that out. So
nice. Once again, I'm learning about cows when I least expected. Thank you, Luke. Dave, you've been doing some work with, you know, dealing with cold soils in the spring and adding cover crops, and the work that you've done or information that you have or knowledge you have, can adding cover crops help, or do they make the cold soils worse in the spring?
I think everybody's fear, and in the back of my mind, it was too, that maybe having those winter cover crops and you go into spring and having a no-till or transitional no-till field would even make it worse. So I asked my colleague Aaron Day about that, and he sent me some data. It's unpublished work, but it's good work from Iowa, where he's a postdoc. And in soybeans, it didn't make any difference at all, the temperature. And in the corn, it actually raised the maximum temperature during the day throughout that time. So it's a small positive in the corn and a neutral in the soybeans, and so that's not a problem.
Well, that's good to hear.
You know, and earlier there was the conversation in the valley that, you know, in the valley we don't have to pray for rain; it just shows up whenever it wants. But for other areas, you know, I'm looking at you, George. You know, do you have concerns about your cover crops using too much moisture where you're at?
Most definitely. You know, this year we were so dry come, you know, middle of July, and we just didn't get any moisture after that. Otherwise, there would have been a lot of people probably putting in cover crops, but at that point they were just like, we're going to wait and see. And there were spots that we did get enough moisture to get the winter wheat up, but there was a lot of places that there wasn't. So we don't really like to, you know, we'd be doing that on wheat still, and we really don't want to chop all that up if we're not going to get much growth out of it in the fall. It kind of defeats the purpose. So there's a lot of people that didn't do nothing, and right now I think everyone's okay with that just because it wouldn't have done anything anyway.
So that's a good point you bring up. I've heard this from a few different farmers, that sometimes if it's too late in the season and they're worried about actually cutting more residue with the drill than they are going to replace with biomass in a cover crop, that they maybe won't seed the cover crop or make that decision. And George, is that part of what you do with your decision making, is seeing how much growth you can get or how that might work in your system?
Yeah, I mean, if you're not going to get the growth out of it, it kind of defeats the purpose, and you got to get in there right away. And it depends on how late your wheat harvest goes. I mean, you know, last couple of years, it seems like it's been a little bit later of a harvest. And so when we're getting into middle of August and to the end of August, we're just not really going to get a lot of growth. But if it can happen, you know, where a guy can be planting those cover crops 1st of August, then I think it can help. But it really, you know, comes down to moisture and what the field, I mean, what the residue is like in that field already. If it's a low residue field, we kind of got to watch it. But if there's more residue where there's potentially more soil holding, you know, or water holding capacity, then we'll do something. So
I guess I'm going to reach out to Anthony next. And so, Anthony, you've talked about how your farm has transitioned into no-till, and we want to see results fast, right? We're in a society where we want answers at the blink of an eye. And so one of the questions is will you see improvements in the soil within 3 to 5 years of reduced tillage? And how is that affected by different soil types?
Yeah, you know, you should see improvements, but we have to take that in light of our environment. We don't know where we're going to be at in our emerging or developing no-till system, given the rainfall patterns that we've had or the drier climates that we had. As I was speaking with Abbey earlier today, if you get lucky and those tougher transition years are in good climate years, you know, that would be a big win. But on our farm, we experienced very challenging years during our transitioning, the wet years of the 90s. And, you know, that disc was still sitting in the trees or on the edge of the yard there. And it was so tempting to get it out and to wreck the year or two that we already had. But we didn't. And I like Luke's comment about how they sold some of their tillage equipment so that temptation isn't there. I applaud that because I know so many farms that haven't done that, and they've decided to pull it out and rip it up, and staying the course is so important. So those soil changes can happen very quickly. Like George said, keeping that soil covered is one of the soil health principles, protecting that soil surface, and then those aggregates start forming. And that's really what we're after is soil aggregates. And the soils that have a little more clay in them will aggregate probably more quickly because they have that bonding strength there of those clay bonds. Our silt loam soils where I'm from, you know, they form bricks if you treat them the wrong way. And I was always rotary hoeing as a kid because I knew that we'd get a crust on our farm and we'd have to break open that crust. But once we went no-till, you know, that all changed. That rotary hoe wasn't needed anymore. And we just let our soil structure do that for us. And you know, and so I guess my experience on my farm, we didn't use cover crops. Cover crops can really aid in that that residue cycling and that nutrient cycling. They provide a living root for those microbes to help form soil microbes or aggregates on the surface of those roots, because that's where the great exchange is occurring, is on the surface of those roots. Pull up any plant. Some weeds don't do this, but all of our agronomic crops do. Pull up a corn plant and look at the soil clinging to the roots. Those are the very starting points of soil aggregates forming. And so, I mean, the more we can follow the soil health principles, include cover crops, try to include diversity, third crop in your rotation just helps so much. Those things, in a sense, really set that system on fire, or energize that system. Maybe that's a better term, but they can help that conversion happen so much more quickly. If you try to do it in a corn bean rotation, I don't have a problem with a corn bean rotation. Our economics are really driving a lot of things, most everything. But if you're just in a corn bean rotation, that's going to take you longer, I think, to see those benefits, because that's how we did it on our farm. And if we could have realized that we needed a grain crop in there, a cereal grain crop, and some cover crops. If you have livestock and manure grazing, that all just speeds it all up, and I think that conversion would happen almost immediately. I like Luke's comment about the full season cover crop and the grazing, that livestock component, acting as a way to break down those above ground residues and convert them into organic forms of nutrients that plants can use. You don't need a manure spreader. It's done. And I think the following years after that full season cover crop are going to be just awesome. And so, but like you said, you got to do the economics, and our intent is to do no harm by what we recommend. We want to see positive things happen, realizing that we can't control everything.
Let's talk a little bit about the fertility changes that you might see. Angie mentioned that we want to see changes quick, and so Dave, is backing off on fertilizer applications year 2 and no-till a good idea?
No, it's really not. It really takes more nitrogen the first 5 years or so than it would normally, because there's a lot of nitrogen being tied up in residue, various forms of residue decomposition. In a conventional till system, that happens over fall, winter, spring. But in a no-till situation, you have the residue and the duff up there toward the surface, so it's in the intermediate compounds, and so it actually takes. We have in our recommendation tables an additional 20 pounds during that first 5 years or so. PK, really no differences there, although the need for the starter application of phosphate increases as you go to the no-till. But yeah, it does increase, and then around that sixth year, the biology has changed. Those changes that Anthony was talking about have happened not only through the aggregates, but because of the biological activity, the number of organisms, the diversity of organisms is all increased, and there's either a conservation of nitrogen when you apply it. It gets taken up in the microbial bodies and kind of acts as a slow release fertilizer. And then we found that we also have the asymbiotic nitrogen fixers that result activity is also increased in long-term no-till. So at least those two reasons, our data just consistently shows. And the corn work and the wheat work and the sunflower work that we did, it just takes less nitrogen to grow a very good crop than it does in a conventional system. So, but it's not immediate. It takes some time.
And I've heard you. I've been in the field with you, and you've been talking with a farmer who asked you, Dave, when do I know? When do I know I can back off? Or what do you recommend for for when do they know, and then how do they go about reducing fertilizer applications?
The nitrogen, you would think that it would be on kind of a schedule, but I don't think it really is. I mean, if you've been in no-till for 10 years or so, it's a slam dunk. But is it going to be the 5th year, the 6th year, the 7th year? It depends. And Anthony was talking about the moisture that you get. If we have like 6 years in a row with deficit moisture, like we did in some areas this year, then you may not reach it after the 6th year. So that's a good question. How do you know? So I've used active optical sensors a lot, for goodness, almost 20 years now. And but a person doesn't have to have an active optical sensor in order to make this work. But one of the basic foundations of making an active optical sensor work for a person and try to predict a yield, and then from that a nitrogen rate for end season, is to put out a nitrogen sufficient strip. And so let's say that your calculator, your nitrogen recommendation for corn was, I don't know, let's just say 150 pounds in a conventional system, and you decide that you've seen enough aggregation and you think things are right, that you could go off that long-term no-till recommendation and lop it to maybe 40 pounds. Okay, so go ahead and do that as a base rate on your pre-plant rate. But then in some area where you can watch it, you put that extra 40 pounds, the width of the applicator, maybe 100 feet long. And if you watch it early in the summer and that area that you put your extra N on is just as green as the rest of the field, then you've made the right choice. But if that 40-pound strip is noticeably greener than the rest of the field, then you better side dress some. So that's how I would handle it. I'd use a standard. I'd put that extra on just to make sure I was doing it right.
Anthony, is there any final comments that you would like to share with the group?
I would like to, I guess I'm on. I got a warning here from the host, but can you hear me?
Yep, you are good.
Okay. Yeah. Boy, I've heard all excellent things today. I'd like to commend everyone, Dave and George and Luke. The soil health emphasis is coming along really at a good pace. We're seeing a lot of interest in it. I work closely with the Soil Health Coalition in South Dakota, and Abbey has very kindly invited me to participate in her events. I'm so thankful for that. It's not a state border issue. I agree, and never intended to make it that way. But just tap into those folks that are doing this successfully in your area or in your adjacent area. Make friends with them. And like someone said in the chat, just ignore the naysayers. That's what my dad was good at. He really ignored folks that really, had not have nice things to say about what we were doing, and still going on in our neighborhood. People have asked me, are you going organic or what's going on there? Because of the cover crops and the small grains that I've introduced. And, I've tried canola and don't be afraid to experiment. Some have said, make those experiments just big enough so that you can remember them, but not too big that they do you harm. And so they got to kind of got to sting a little bit, and so you remember them and you learn from those, because everybody's made mistakes, and but tapping into those that have already made those mistakes is really a good thing, because it can help you avoid them in the future. So thank you everyone for today.
Awesome. Well, that was awesome, Anthony. Thanks for that final word. And now we'll go to Luke. Do you have any closing thoughts you'd like to share with us?
I'll agree. Surround yourself with people that, like-minded like you are, and don't be afraid to diversify. I know I'm really fortunate with my family that they're very supportive, and we're all on the same, we all have the same goal and same mindset. So, and you got to have a positive mindset, and I know it's going to be tough at times, but just keep going. It's going to be fun. Thank you for having me today.
Thanks, Luke. We always enjoy having our farmer perspectives, and that leads us to you, George. Are there any closing thoughts you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, just the one thing I'd like to say is, it's going to be tough to do a lot of stuff when you're just corn and beans and getting wheat or, sunflowers or any other type of crop in there. It'll help spread workload, first of all, and it'll help with using different modes of chemistry to help battle some of the weeds that, that are coming on all the time now. So those are some of the biggest things, and it really is just a management decision.
Last but certainly not least, Dave, do you have any thoughts to share?
Yeah, you're very gracious. So I think it's just really important. So many growers, and I understand why, look at just the next year. How am I going to make next year work? But in some corner of your head, you need to think about, what do I want this farm to look like 20 years from now? What do I want to achieve? What do I want to leave my kids or whoever is going to take this thing over, and decide that you're going to make some positive changes. And if you have a mix of family ground and rented ground, experiment on maybe the family ground first, and then talk with the landlords. Make sure, let them know what you're doing successfully and how it may increase the value of their land or take care of that land into the future. Even absentee landlords want to take care of the land. I mean, they're given all kinds of environmental things, and they want to be stewards as much as what you do, but they need to know that they're going to have an income stream, and you need to communicate how that's possible. And in addition to that, and improve the quality of their soil. I think almost all landlords would be in on that.
Thank you so much to our panel members today. It was excellent to have your perspective. Dave, if you can hang around for the tech talk, there's a nitrogen question in strip till, and that's something we haven't talked a whole lot about, is strip till, but we have this last tech talk session. That's kind of tough to say, tech talk. Who came up with that name? But we have this last session with Stephen Schuster, who's from Minto, North Dakota, and he has a Soil Warrior machine. So this session is sponsored by Soil Warrior. But we'll start with Stephen. We'll bring you on. And Dave, if you can hang around as part of this panel to answer this nitrogen question, that would be great. But Stephen, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you're doing?
Hey, good afternoon. Stephen Schuster, Minto, North Dakota, about 100 miles straight north of Fargo. And I got asked by Soil Warrior to talk about my experience with their machine this year. I got opened up to a Soil Warrior last March down at a planter clinic in Arizona. Got to actually see one run and liked what I saw. I had done some research years back at a previous job and decided it was a good time to take the leap in and start experimenting. That's where I'm at. I'm an owner of a machine now, just early in the process of learning the do's and don'ts, I guess.
Let's talk about fall strip till first. Can you talk about how that went for you?
So this is a particular field. It was pretty heavy wheat stubble. It'll be pinto beans in 2021. And we struggled because it was really abnormally dry. And it was one surprise that we had. We weren't prepared to run the strip till machine across the strips twice. But you can see on the left is what it looked like after one pass, and on the right was after a second pass. So what we found worked best for us was to go through once and shatter the soil, and then come through that second time, turn the fertilizer on, and get it incorporated into that zone. So that was just adapting along the way. We ended up getting half as many acres every day as we thought, but you just learn as you go. And the picture's up now. That's a situation where we did not get sugar beets harvested in 2019. And so we went in there in May, I'll call it right around June 1st, onto those sugar beets left in the ground. And it was our only successful attempt at strip tilling an entire quarter this spring. We found the machine just in our soil type wasn't set up quite right, just didn't work for us in our heavy soils. We had a lot of wheel track problems, but this in particular field was lighter soil, so we were able to get the whole field strip tilled, and we planted sunflowers onto it. And my planter operator was just beside himself amazed at how well the planter did work on the strip till versus the readings we get when we're just going on conventional till. So we're really excited about what we saw.
You talked a little bit about the fertilizer applications. And so Dave, if you can follow up on this one question that we did get on, is strip till considered similar to no-till in recommendations, or is that strictly for no-till?
Our recommendations for corn contain several sites, the long-term no-till, strip till, and the strip till farms perform very similar to what a purist no-till would be. So as long as you're not doing, let me see, I would say this right. Okay, so if you're using a shank, let's say the shank is 6-8 inches deep or something like that, then that's really not a problem. All you're doing is cracking the soil, but you're not really turning it over. And as long as you use one of this type strip tillers and only going 2 inches deep, that's not a problem. If you use some of the distill strip tillers and go more than 2 inches deep, I think that's a problem, because you're disturbing the aggregates in that whole 6-inch area, and that puts you way behind. So I would think that would be a major problem. But as long as you're doing a shank or a very shallow disc, then it would act just like no-till.
And Steve, will you remind me that Soil Warrior is a Coulter system on that? Is that right?
You can do either or. Mine is set up as a Coulter machine. We do run kind of in that 4 to 7 inch depth and 8 to 11 inches of width. And I understand trying to build the soil health, and I don't disagree with you, Dave. It's just, there's different approaches to where everybody's trying to get. I almost feel like I'm using the strip till as conventional till outside of the wheel tracks. It is sometimes how I look at it, just to combat some of the problems that I have. So that's exactly what that is.
And so now, what are the positives of strip till compared to no-till? So Stephen, why are you looking at strip till versus strictly no-till?
For me, it's a mindset of not being able to let go of the having to work everything completely black. As far as not full scale conventional tillage, my mind got pushed in a different direction a few years back when we tried some things on leaving some wheat stubble and direct seeding into them. And we tried some instances where stuff wasn't supposed to work, and it did. And so that opened to my eyes to say, well, I'm in conventional till now. I understand benefits of no-till. I'm going to stop somewhere in the middle for now and continue to have that tillage, that blackening of the soil and incorporating of the fertilizer, working up wheel tracks. We struggled up here this fall, even with it as dry as it was, getting that machine to even work through our combine wheel tracks, as well as anywhere we got on a sprayer track from this past year. So if I can't even work them up, going across it twice with a Soil Warrior, it still wasn't perfect. I just don't know what strip till would have looked like. And super heavy clay type soils where we're at. I have a little bit of sandy loam, but most of my farm where I'm focused on is super heavy clay, where we're just trying to eliminate compaction is one of the number one reasons. Eliminating compaction and creating a more uniform seed bed. Just, we're learning about corn and soybeans, and emergence timing is everything. And even more important in soybeans than we thought over corn. And so making that seed bed as even as possible gets you off to the best start. And so I would say my main two goals are eliminate compaction and create a more uniform seed bed.
Is there anything you would like to change to make your strip till machine better or more user friendly for you?
One thing I've thought about is maybe trying some different wave numbers on the coulters, or maybe different diameters. When we struggled this spring, it was basically that the flutes on my waves were too deep. And so we were just creating lumps that were the size of the flute. And just in doing a little research with some previous owners other people who own them, we could use a less aggressive coulter and still potentially use that machine in the spring and not have such a clumping problem, so to speak. So I wouldn't mind trying some different coulter combinations in the future. size and aggressiveness.
You have a dedicated person to run this machine, is that right? And how's that work out for you with the fall and then also the spring strip till?
So far, it hasn't been a problem. I mean, we have a qualified guy that we put in there, and it's been a learning curve for all of us. And so he did an awesome job. And the guy who was running the Soil Warrior isn't my guy who runs the planter. And so we kind of got ahead to get everybody on the same page and make sure we were ahead of thinking ahead on the guidance lines and stuff like that. But for the most part, once you get the machine up and operating, it's not that it's difficult to operate. You just kind of got to try to think ahead a little bit more. You got to pretend like you're in the planter, basically. It's really not a problem once it clicks in your head. So
great. Is there anything else you can think of that we didn't ask you, Stephen, about your system that you want to share with other people who are interested in strip till? Or
one of the biggest things for me was going down the road of when you fix one problem, you can easily create another, and we've certainly found that. And so in my case, we didn't have guidance on the planter. We didn't have nitrogen on the planter. I mean, we're strip tilling into wheat stubble. We got lucky this fall where we had 4 months to do our work. Normally that's not the case. So we have to find a way to be keeping up on our tillage. And we can't put nitrogen out there in August or September. And so we've had to go to a system on our planter to do that. So we fixed one problem, created another. Also, I've realized maybe some of the goals I set out to go after in the beginning maybe aren't exactly the same goals I have today after running it a little bit in the spring. And we did quite a bit this fall, but I've just tried not to get so focused on one individual thing. Just kind of let the machine take you where it's going to go for this area. I mean, it's extremely new in Eastern Walsh County. So we're just learning, and don't be afraid to if it doesn't work exactly the way you thought it was gonna, because chances are it won't. So just keep trying.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think with most things, soil health, it may not work exactly how you think it's going to work. So if you keep at it and you keep trying, then that's probably the name of the game.